Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. Cammy and I are here for another episode of Let's Chat. So, Cammy, I'm glad that we're here tonight and recording a very good conversation as we normally do.
Me too. I'm excited about this topic. I'm just curious to see where it's going to take us.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm going to harken back to when the concept of That's Comical was created on my regular channel that I just decided to, based on popular demand, if you will, start incorporating comic books in my channel. And one of the first videos that I did, which in comic book terms is very valuable to some because it was Andy's first appearance. So we basically did a video called Our Comic Book Origin Stories, where we talked about how we first got into comics and what it was that we enjoyed and how we carried on what we enjoy to this very day. So it was definitely a video that had good vibes on Cammy's end, and she and I had been talking on videos and off videos about the fact that it is actually now 5 years since the two of us started collecting comics. Well, her for the first time and me reintroducing myself to comics. So she thought it would be cool to do another kind of an origins video, but in a different sense, just to take a look back at the last 5 years and where we both stand as comic book collectors. So this is going to be another one of those times where I'm going to apologize profusely to Cammy because I know she loves getting into really great things, but I always feel so guilty about all the money she's spending. I'm not lying, Cammy. I feel terrible about the fact that you spend all this money on things you love, and you're always telling me that even though you love certain things, it's like I gotta stop, and then here I come with another piece of news or another picture of a certain thing that if you didn't see it, you'd yell at me. So it's a weird, it's like a very strange relationship that we have in regards to our collecting and hobby habits, if you will.
Well, I can't totally blame you. I mean, through many of our other conversations, I've been a collector of things my whole life. So comic books, although I will kind of go back a little bit. So comic books for me started in, I would say, elementary school, kind of middle school. And although I don't really talk about it because it's not as extensive, it started for me kind of back in middle school, but I don't talk about it a lot because I wasn't an avid reader in that respect. So for the beginning of it, it was Archie comics. I would always just pick up one of the, little tiny thick bound at the grocery store counter. I would be like, hey mom, can I grab this? And yeah, just throw it in the cart kind of thing. And I did that for years, not really conceptualizing I was reading comics. It was a fun little thing that I could grab at the counter. And then when I started hanging out with my buddies in middle school, it was me and five guys that were just nerds. I mean, video games, comic books, you name it, cartoons. They were my friends though in elementary school, and those were the first guys I played like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with and everything, in the sandbox kind of thing. So they started reading comic books, and they would kind of integrate me into that world, but I wasn't avidly reading them, week after week like they were. And that was X-Men. X-Men was a huge part of my middle school. So flash forward to adult years and me meeting you through the internet platform. When you and I first started talking about, I guess, comics and that, and I'll use the term loosely, it started in the world of animation. And that for us was kind of a segue because, I'm a huge retro cartoon fanatic. I love collecting them. I love still watching them. And so you and I kind of became more connected through the world of DC animation before we started doing the comics. And then, as you know, the pandemic hit and you fell into comics very heavily, which then kind of turned your channel. And that's what piqued my interest. And I thought, you know what? It's been a long time since I've really fallen into a comic book, some of these things that you and Andy were talking about sounded very intriguing. And I thought, why not? And there was a lot of reasons, obviously, health reasons for me that kind of catapulted me into comic books versus reading novels because my brain just wasn't there. And so being able to sit down and read again, comics really saved me, I mean, in more than one way. And it's something that I hold very near and dear because in the process of kind of almost relearning how to read again, how to connect with my brain, how to make my brain and my mouth say the same thing. For our audience that doesn't know, I had a mini stroke in 2020, and it really did change the neurological path of my brain for a while. And a stroke looks different on everybody. For me, it was heavy brain fog, and a lot of the times what I was thinking here wasn't happening here, and I just wasn't as quick. A lot of the terms and terminology and big words that I was accustomed to using just wasn't happening for me, and it was very frustrating. I felt locked and trapped in my own head, and I thought, well, maybe that's it. Maybe I'm just not going to read again. And then I dove into comics with you, and it was like, whoa. I mean, on so many different levels. And here we are thinking that I was going to collect to this capacity, though. No, you're absolutely right. Because, my journey began digitally with Comixology, and I really thought that's where I was going to stay planted. But unfortunately, Comixology had so many changes, it became extremely frustrating. And we've talked about those changes publicly, we've talked about them privately. I still am subscribed. I still use it. It's just not as fun as it used to be. They are making some changes, though, that I noticed the other day where I was able to purchase something on my Kindle versus having to log on to my desktop. So I'm hoping they are kind of going back to those subtle, dirty ways. I don't think it'll ever be what it was because, as you know, the app is no longer. The app has become completely obsolete, which is extremely frustrating because as a Kindle reader and subscriber, I preferred my comic books and my novels separate. I liked having those two spaces. And now everything's mushed together and it's just, I don't know, it's gross. It's like, the kid that doesn't want their food to touch.
Yeah, I know. I know a lot of people like that. No, you mentioned a few things that I can definitely relate to. I mean, I'm not surprised that when you were in middle school, because you and I are the same age, and it's just like you talked about X-Men. I mean, the '90s, that was a big time for comic books. In a good way and a bad way. So, you had all of these famous superheroes having some of the best years that they ever had in comic books. And that was just due to the fact of the historical creation of Image Comics and the real mark that indie comics were finally making. And because of the fact that Image Comics was created, that was when DC and Marvel started making those really big and important storylines like the death of Superman or a great X-Men story from the '90s, Fatal Attractions. And that was a really, really great time for comics. There was just so many interesting things taking place. But at the same time, the other problem was the fact that at the same time, because the '90s were so exciting, it was also just because of the fact that there was the big speculators market. And that was when people were just saying, oh, we're buying these comics because they're going to be valuable someday because of everything that's happening, the variant covers, the various events that were taking place. So people were just buying and buying and buying, and then the bubble burst and everything went downhill. So I was not going to say that I wasn't a part of that, because that was the interesting thing about me collecting as a kid. When I was collecting as a kid, I was really more focused on collecting the big issues rather than actually reading the stories. And I think at the time, that was also when my parents were looking at me buying all these books, and they're like saying to me, do you read them? Like, do you think they're going to be valuable? Are you going to sell them? I just never really answered the question. I was just happy to have them in my possession. But of course, fast forward to high school, 1996, 97, that's when I stopped reading. And that was when I was really more focused on other things, more so getting into things that you guys all knew me for, the music, the movies, and all of that stuff. So I just let comics go by the wayside, but I never, ever forgot about all those great characters. That was the one thing that stuck with me. And I ventured into other mediums where those characters were, like the Batman the animated series and the X-Men the animated series and all of those DC movies, and then the live action movies finally started coming out in big ways. So that was basically where I was absorbing all of my superhero stuff. But I always knew in the back of my head, one day I know I'm going to get back to comic books, because I know that there are so many great stories that are being told. And I'm hearing about all of these big names like Jeff Johns and what he's doing with Green Lantern and Blackest Night. And I'm like, one day, I'm going to read these books. So it was before the pandemic in 2019. I am on a little bit of a trip away from home. I'm with my wife, and we're at her parents, and we were going to go to the Franklin Institute to see a Marvel exhibit, and they were going to show you things from the movies, and I wasn't sure what else they were going to feature. So yeah, there were the typical stuff, like movie props and stuff like that. But the part that really connected with me was some of the vintage comic books that were on display. Like I saw copies of Captain America #1 from 1942. And then I just keep venturing through the exhibit, and I get to the X-Men, and all of a sudden on display, I see this comic book, and I'm like, holy crap, I own that comic book. And the funniest thing is, this is also one of the first 3 comic books that I ever purchased in my entire life. This was one of the first 3, because I wanted to get this whole story that it was a part of. So when I saw my own book on display to a certain degree, I was like, I got to go back to my parents' house, because I obviously was married at the time, wasn't living with them anymore. But I said, I got to get back to my parents' house, and I got to get my old comic books, because I had one long box and I had a short box that was filled with Wizard magazines, which was at the time the comic book price guide. See, I was more into the speculator rather than the collector, and enjoying the reading. And at that time, I was reading a lot of books. So reading was something that I was interested in. So I said to my wife, you know what? I think I'm going to try and get some comics again. Like I want to do a little catch up. So I did a mixture of things. I was venturing into the books and the stories that I didn't know much about that I wanted to know more about. Plus, I went into my old collection and I was saying, okay, I need to fill some gaps here. So that was when I started buying a lot of back issues. And that was also when I was really starting to spend a lot of money. I think on a monthly basis, I was spending somewhere between $500 and $800 just
Yikes.
to just to
I
get
don't think I've ever spent that much in a month. I mean, don't get me
well,
wrong. I have had more expensive months, but yeah, definitely not to that caliber.
well, considering that kind of money and what I was receiving for that kind of money, like $800 would get you hundreds of books.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I got you.
because discovered all of this. I discovered this eBay market. I discovered exactly how inexpensive it really was to get issues that, because again, I wasn't looking at the time, because now we're in 2019. I'm not looking for them as a valuable commodity. I'm looking for them as something to enjoy and something to read. So thank God I did what I was doing, because the following year, that was when the pandemic hit. And I was
Mm.
just like, I don't know what I'm going to do besides, thank goodness, working, because I knew I wasn't allowed to leave my house. So I had a couple of brand new long boxes filled with comics. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to read. And I'm glad that I did, because it was my saving grace. The comics saved me too, because I had something to keep myself occupied, because I just didn't have the mindset to actually read books. I mean, to have the visualizations and the superheroes, just something true fantasy that really uplifted me. And right before the pandemic hit, that was when I was connecting with my friend Daniel, and of course connecting with Andy. And that was also when I actually said maybe I should pick up some more recent books as well, because I'm just having so much fun with these back issues. And that was right around the time that Spawn hit issue 300. So I was just like, oh, well, that's just a big collector's item. And I love Spawn. So let me pick that book up too. So that's basically where I was when I started to get back into comics. And I still think one of the funniest things about going through my old collection is seeing some of the books that I had and talking to some comic book fans and them being completely surprised by the fact that I had those books. I mean, I told you, I believe, I know Andy knows, but I have the original four first printing issues of Kingdom Come. I bought them I bought them in 1996 because I was a big fan of Alex Ross's art. I also have the original four floppies of the Marvels. So, or just Marvels actually. So I bought them when they had literally been in the market for like less than a year or two. So they weren't expensive. But now that I take a look at those books and know how hard they are to come by to a certain degree, or how valuable they are to the average collector today who only knows these stories through the trade paperback, it sort of makes me happy to know that I did collect certain things that I did when I did, because I'm just glad to say that I'm a proud owner of these things. And it makes me more want to hold on to them and cherish them rather than just sell them.
Well, and that's where I had to be very careful because as you and I started to banter back and forth of things that I should read and things I should catch up on, being the type of collector I am, I prefer sometimes to go the original route. And I have been an avid eBayer for over 20 years. And so I would go and seek these out and just kind of, in some cases, I would be patient and just kind of watch different, lots and things like that just to see if maybe the prices were going to go down. But then some things I had to make the realization they're vintage, they're retro, they're sought after. This is what the price is. If you want it, then this is what you're going to have to pay for it. So I had to be very careful as to what I considered something I wanted to collect. Because again, going back to the digital versus the floppies, going the floppy route was never my intent. Space was a big caveat to that. And two, I get very apprehensive touching comic books. I don't like to put my fingers on them. It makes me very nervous. So that said, I thought, well, if I'm going to collect these things, then is it going to be like something I put on my wall and frame it? So I'm like, well, I don't want to be that kind of collector. So I've come kind of full circle with it. I've learned to touch my comics. I've learned to read and enjoy my comics. I've learned to hold them differently. I'm still very careful with them. But there are some floppies that I've been very excited to add. And that's after usually reading a bind up, which again can cost you some cheddar if you're buying a bind up and then you decide down the road you want to replace it with the original floppies. But if you're good at reselling, then you can sell your bind ups and keep the floppies. So it becomes a game if you will, and it's a game I've enjoyed playing. But in the same regard, I've had so much fun learning about things. And now I think the biggest pat on the back that I give myself is being able to identify with creators that had you asked me 5 years ago, I wouldn't know who the heck you were talking about. And so to be able to identify with who these people are and who drew it and who colored it, and that's such a huge revelation for me, and I'm continuing to learn. I by no means am a expert, and I don't know everything about everyone and all of the different vintage comics by any capacity, but I do know a lot more today than I knew 5 years ago. So that just goes to show you that I did invest a lot of me in this process.
Yeah, and to a certain degree when it comes to the bind up, yes, like I through discovering the comic book store that I go to and like browsing through their back issues and seeing what certain books that I was curious about are being charged and what people are buying, that's how I realized that certain books that I thought that I can never buy. And I think it's just also because of the fact that now we're like in 2019 and 2020. What do I have that I didn't have when I was 12, 13, 14? I didn't have money. I wasn't making money. I mean, what is it that wonderful Funko documentary talked about when the guy who ran Toy Tokyo, he talked about that when kids grow up and they have money that they can spend, they're going to buy the things that their parents threw out. So that's
Or never
basically,
let us have because they
or
thought it was frivolous, or
yeah,
it's a phase.
And
I
that's
mean,
like,
I have to give my parents credit though. My parents did kind of lean into my collecting, even though they didn't necessarily understand or agree with it. But it was very selective, you know, like leaving my parents' house, I had my Disney collection and my Alice collection. And one could say that's one and the same, but and then of course, you know, you had your little things like I had a shared collection of Barbies with my sister, so that we had to divvy up, you know, things like that. But I've always been interested in everything, and that was the hardest part for my mom. She's like, you like everything, you like action figures, you like, you know, Hot Wheels and Barbies and, you know, this, that, and the other. You have to slow down because you're just going to end up carrying all this stuff with you through life, and carrying stuff is heavy and expensive. And I've had some very valuable lessons when it comes to collecting. I lost a huge part of my Alice collection in a flood,
yeah,
and that absolutely devastated me. I mean, to the point of tears, because I was watching the paint come off of, you know, snow globes that I could never get back, you know?
yeah,
And so that honestly was a very triggering point for me in my collection. And it really stifled me for a very long time. And then it wasn't until Funko Pops, believe it or not, that I started collecting again. I mean, it just kind of reinvigorated me. It gave me a sense of, hey, this is fun again. I'm enjoying doing this. And it was a slow crawl, but now I'm back and
yeah.
obviously
The story
nuttier than
tells
ever.
the story tells itself. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, and like with the bind ups and stuff like that, it's like when I mentioned things like Marvels and Kingdom Come, it's like I have these original copies and they're wonderful, but I get very nervous opening up these valuable comics. And I think it's just because of the quality that they are. So I went out and bought the bind ups of those two stories because, yes, I want to reread these stories, but I also don't want to ruin these comics either. So yeah, it's so yeah. So the madness really began in 2019 because I was really investing hard in these books, and I was also trying to see like how far back can I actually go? Like, what is the oldest book that I can actually get into my collection for the best price that I possibly can? And I think the oldest Marvel comic that I have in my collection is I think I only paid $8 for it. Like I got a copy of Uncanny X-Men 200. Like that's like I know that I'll never be able to get any comic book from X-Men that is connected to the Dark Phoenix saga, which is why I still haven't gotten the Dark Phoenix omnibus. Like that's going to be a heavy investment because those are always expensive. Omnibuses can be about $100, but I know that I want to get the Dark Phoenix saga, a specific one in omnibus form, because it also includes the Phoenix saga before it. So that to me, I feel that if I get that omnibus, I'll officially have a complete classic X-Men collection because I'll have like all the greatest stories that Chris Claremont wrote before he left. And that's basically what every X-Men fan wants. They want the Chris Claremont runs because it's all the great stories. Mutant Massacre, Fall of the Mutants, Inferno, Extinction Agenda. That's the reason why. But so when the pandemic hit, that was when I was starting to invest in new comics. And I would probably think that 2021 was a weird time for me collecting because that was when I'm going to take another page out of your book. That was when I really started venturing down many different rabbit holes because I was trying to see what do these new companies that I've never heard of have? Like, what stories can I get into? Let me take a look at some of the most well known. Let me see if I want to invest in these. So I was picking up X-Men books, Spider-Man books, Batman books, Superman books, and all of these indie books, including some of the most well-known like Spawn. And it was just basically to a point where I was buying about 50 or more new comic books a month, and I was spending somewhere between 150 to $200 because there were just so many. Like I was literally coming home every Wednesday with like 14 books, 15 books, 20 books. But that's also because I was reading all this stuff. So I'm not surprised that I did that because I was back. I wanted to get invested again. And I also just wanted to see like where were all the good stories, you know? But through that whole process, that is also when you realize that not everything that you are interested in reading ends up being as good as you want it to be. So I actually have one of my comic boxes because like I started with two and now I'm up to about 20. And there's a whole box that I have that is filled with comics that I want to get rid of because I'm just not interested in them anymore. And I have no idea if I can get rid of them or because I don't think I want to really give these books a second read. Not many of them, but I thought I was going to get some good stories. Thank God they were mostly miniseries, but I was not really happy with the result of some of these reads.
Well, and I think that can be said with anything. I mean, even when you're reading novels or series or, waiting for, that second book to come out or whatever, they're not all winners. And I think there's a resale market for everything. You just got to know where to sell them and how to sell them. And you can get in some cases, you can get your money back. I mean, sometimes you will lose out. But I think for the most part, in that regard, I am happy to say I have a very small a handful of books that I want to resell on the comic front. I have a very small handful of books that, in terms of comic books that I just have no interest in keeping, rereading. They weren't winners. But where I did kind of go off the money train is in indie comics, because although I'm talking about all these big name, titles like Batman the Long Halloween and The Three Jokers and, all these things that you want tangibly, there were so many Boom Studios and IDW titles and Scout comic titles that I picked up because that's where the horror was. That's where all those, crazy indie titles were. So that's when I noticed I started to spend some money, because I ended up, you know, not thinking before I was buying. I was just kind of cover buying. And that gets dangerous really fast because I'm like, oh, that looks good and that looks good. And I do that with books too, so it's no surprise, but I really had to rein myself in because, again, much like collecting, it's like, okay, yeah, you want all of the things, but if you are kind of spreading yourself thin, so to speak, when it comes to your budget, you're not going to get everything that you want when you want it. So like you would tell me, oh, this series is coming out, and it's like, oh, I just invested XYZ and ABC. So the funds just aren't there. But I'm getting better at it because now I don't just gravitate to, the FOMO that I had spoken about earlier in the year. I don't have that anymore. It's like, if I want it later, okay, yeah, I might end up paying a little bit more for it, or I might not. I might find somebody who just wants to get it off their plate and out of their home, and they're just like, here, you can have it for this price. So I've gotten very fortunate. I think the key to that is patience, because again, with the FOMO, you're going to end up spending more because you see it, you want it, you buy it, and it doesn't matter what it costs. But when you are kind of being patient about it, you end up finding some pretty good deals. So I'm happy with my collection. I have no regrets in anything that I've purchased. And I'm just slow to the jump now in terms of what's important to me and where I see myself going in the future with comic purchasing.
Yeah, and I think the other really big positive about collecting right now is the fact that there is a very big comic book community here on YouTube. And trust me, the types of community that we used to belong to, it feels so liberating to be far, far away from it.
Doesn't
And
it?
oh yeah, it does. Because even the people in that community that actually do read comics, I don't really get the kind of passion and enthusiasm that I do from people in the comic book community. And I love the comic book community because the videos are so diverse. There's so many different kinds of videos. You get everything from people discussing various stories to what are some of the big comic books that are out there in the world today, or what were my favorite books of the week? What was your favorite book of the week? There's just so many great discussions being had and so many great topics being shared. And I think that was also one of the reasons why it inspired me to talk about them here, and more importantly, create another channel that features a bunch of people who are very much interested in these things. And I think another reason why I'm really happy about the fact that I found the community is the fact that even though they give their various opinions, unlike some other communities, it's not the end all be all. Like they really all want you to make the judgment call for yourself. And I really love that because I feel fearless when I will hear someone talk about a comic that they didn't like, but a comic that I actually enjoyed. And the fact that I could actually reach out and give my thoughts, and at the end they're not gonna blacklist you or say that you have no idea what you're talking about. And you can also see other people in those comments, and at the end of the day you'll get great conversations, because the great thing about being in the comic book community is, to a certain degree, you're going to find common ground with somebody about something, because the comic book world is so vast now that there's that a conversation that could start very ill-tempered can end up with people giving each other recommendations on things to read. And I really do enjoy that a great deal about the community. However, there is a lot of negativity in the comic book world this around now, and truthfully I don't blame them, because I definitely see where they're coming from. But again, me investing in books and following the writers, following the artists, following the news, I feel that from 2022 to now, I just feel like I'm becoming that comic book expert, the person who knows what they're looking for, knows the right places to venture out to gain the knowledge and make the right decisions about what they want to read and what they want to purchase. Sometimes there is something that drops that, like, especially in the DC and Marvel world, with a title that is on the downturn, you find out there's this one specific story that's coming, and you want to get your hands on it because you want to see, is this was finally going to bring them back to glory? And then you read that book and you're like, oh, God damn it, I've been duped again. And it's happened so many times right now with X-Men. And it makes me so sad because of where we used to be, where X-Men used to be, and where X-Men is now. It is sad. It is so sad.
It's just a matter of finding that right creator. If you find a good creator that has the vision, that understands the history, they can bring it back to life. That stands to reason with something as simple as like Perez and was it Wolfman, I think was his last
Yeah.
name.
You're talking about
When
Marv Wolfman and George Perez. Yes, Crisis.
Yeah, well, they did that, but that actually stemmed from a history of DC, and where Perez actually did the pictorial and then handed it over to Marv, and he kind of just put in the storyboard and just gave a very brief synopsis of the history of DC in that time, not knowing that that was going to end up being a time capsule. And then here I was 20 years later, and I picked that up on happenstance. I just found it in the wild, and I'm like, oh, this looks fun, maybe I'll learn a thing or two, not knowing how much history was in those books. And it's crazy because you never know what's a gem, you never know what's intended to be a gem, but it's really just what speaks to you. And it's nice when you find a creator that understands the history and they're able to kind of match it and bring it back to life. And who knows, maybe that'll happen for X-Men. We've seen some incredible things happen with all of our superheroes, and some really crazy whack things that we're like, but why? There's a market for everything. I think part of the creation process is us as readers need to understand that these creators are not creating this for us. They're doing it for them. It's their vision. It's what they want. And if we happen to resonate with that, then that's super cool. And if even more of us happen to resonate with it in a community and we're talking about it and it's bringing us together, then it's done something really cool. And, I think in terms of the negativity, you can find it in any community that you enter into, it's just a matter of filtering it out. And I think for me, given the community I came from and now having jumped into this one, I just tend to, as soon as I see the red flags, I veer away. It's like an instant, oh, danger, Will Robinson. I don't need this in my life. So I just kind of try and keep as much negativity out. You just don't see as much of it though in the comic book community because, like you said, there's encouragement for varied opinions and points of view, and we base that off of circumstance and what our background is in terms of how much knowledge we come in with. And there's acceptance regardless if you're someone like me who has only dabbled in it for a handful of years, or if you have someone like yourself who has a very rich history, and there's someone out there that has even more than so it's just really incredible to kind of just see the minds come together and these types of conversations happen, because I think that even just the relationship that you and I have forged, our friendship has become a lot more valuable to me, because we share this commonality now. I can pick up the phone and have a conversation with you, and it's like, look, I have value to add to this conversation now. I went to the comic book store today and here's what I did. So our friendship has come a long way, and it's rooted in this idea of this,
and
this interesting legacy that is comics.
and your knowledge of comic books, I can definitely say, has become vastly from where it used to be, because the fact that you actually mentioned, with barely any of my help, you mentioned Marv Wolfman and George Perez. So man, you have already come a great deal far. The fact that you mentioned them I was like, I'm not lying. I was listening to you say it and you got them both right. I was like, wow, she's here. She has arrived. You are here,
Yes,
Tammy. But
I've been waiting for the day.
but that's the other thing. It's like, I love my superheroes. I do. Just like when I read certain books from some of my favorite heroes right now, forget about the X-Men. That's a whole animal right now. But it's just like when I read what Chip Zdarsky right now is writing in Batman, it's just like, no, it's like when I read what Doug Moenick and Denny O'Neil and Jeff Loeb used to write for Batman in the 90s. It's just not the same. Not to say that Chip Zdarsky's a bad writer. I mean, look, you and I both agree that Stillwater is a good book. It's a very well written book. I know that he's done so many other things. A lot of people really like this book that he wrote called Sex Criminals. It's a book that I keep hearing about, but I don't think it's a book that I'm personally going to read. It just doesn't seem like something I'd be interested in. But that's the other thing. It's like, when before I stopped collecting comics when I was a kid, I was starting to follow the writers and the artists. Well, like I was following the Garth Ennises of the world and the Todd McFarlanes of the world. So I knew who these guys were. But these days, it's like, I'm following these guys and a bunch of new people, like Chip Zdarsky is one of them, Ram V and Jeremy Adams, Scotty Young, Cullen Bunn. Like I'm following all of these names, but it's just like I am not gonna pick up everything that they're writing. It's just like okay, I like your stuff, I like what you do, but let me read what your book is about. If it's a book that is not going to connect with me, I'm still going to read something else of yours, but I'm not necessarily going to pick up this book. And that's really what I think it means to be a smart collector. It's like, you don't have to read everything religiously from every writer. It's like Cullen Bunn. I was introduced to him through a maxi series called Basilisk from Boom, and I really, really enjoyed it. It was one of those books that not many people talked about, but I very much enjoyed the story. And so Cullen Bunn wrote a couple of other books, and I didn't really care for what the stories were about. And then Ghost Lore starts coming at Boom Studios, and that's a book that I'm interested in. I'm reading it right now. It's really, really good. And then there's coming in April, there's Monsters Are My Business and Business is Bloody. It's just like that idea just sounds great. It's like when I saw the cover for Stray Dogs back in 2021, I never read a single book from Tony Fleeks. I had never seen the artwork of Trish Foster. But all I know is that when I read what that book was, I was like, there's something special about this book. And who would have thought that it would have been one of the most popular books of 2021? You know,
And now we have a
everyone,
new series coming off of it.
oh, and now everyone who knew about Stray Dogs is so excited for Feral in March. I am so excited for these two to team up again and get me a whole new story. But it's like another big writer, Kyle Higgins, and Ryan Parrott. Ryan Parrott wrote the Power Rangers books.
Mhm.
They are now putting together this supermassive universe in Image Comics. So I tried to get into Radiant Black and Rogue Sun and read a couple of arcs, but it got a little stale because that's my methodology right now in an ongoing series. It's like I'm gonna get if I really think that there's value here, I'm gonna read your first arc. Okay. If I don't like what I read by the time the arc is over, or if there's nothing that's keeping me intrigued, I'm done with you. That's it.
I think one that speaks to that, when at least it comes to mind for me, for you, is James Tiny in the Fourth. For me, I fell all into all of his work, but you didn't resonate with everything. I was reading Something is Killing the Children, Department of Truth, House of Slaughter, Nice House on the Lake, and you were like, yeah, some of that doesn't work for me, but it all worked for me in some kind of way. And I just think that really speaks to reason, that we have so much in common when it comes to him as a creator, but there's just so much of his work that you don't like, which also speaks to the collecting, because I have so much more of his work because of that. And that's where, some of my indie comics had gotten so big and bulky because I was doing the whole, and some of those series are very meaty, like Something is Killing the Children. There's a lot. A
Oh yeah,
lot.
I mean it's still going. I mean
Yeah.
sometimes the and it's also so many spin-offs. I mean like I
Yeah.
tried House of Slaughter, didn't really grab me. I know that there's another series that's coming out. Maybe it's already out. I'm not exactly sure. But yeah, look, I know that James Tynion has a fan base. He has a couple of other books, like he wrote this book called Blue Book,
Oh, I picked that one up. I
and then
haven't dove deep into it, but I do have Blue Book.
there's World Tree. Like the stories just weren't grabbing me. They weren't. But you know, when I found a book like Wild's End by Dan Abnett. Now I know who Dan Abnett was, but I didn't really read much about him. But I read the blurb. It was like Wind in the Willows meets War of the Worlds. I'm like, that sounds cool. The idea, the mix, and not only did I enjoy the 6-issue miniseries, I had no idea that it was the fourth miniseries. Like I did not know that there were three previous ones. The third one, unfortunately, was never sold as floppy. You had to buy the hardcover bind up to read the third story arc. But I did manage to get my hands on the first two story arcs. I think I got all 6 comics for $20.
Oh,
I'm not
nice.
saying, I mean, I'm sorry, all 12 comics for $20. There's two of them. But then you know, Mark Miller is another example. We read a Mark Miller title. We read Superman Red Sun together, but there's so much other things that he has done. And I knew that he had a vast world. Like I know about Miller World and I know about the film adaptations of some of his comics. And those film adaptations are wonderful. I love Kick-Ass. I love Kingsman. They're great adaptations. So when he and Pepe Larraz gave us Big Game last summer, which was the first Miller World crossover. I was going into it not knowing anything about Miller World except for some of the characters I was familiar with through the movies and one of the newer titles that he wrote, Ambassadors, which is a great title. Loved the Ambassadors. But the story just sucked me in. And I was starting to learn about all these characters. So, of course, after Big Game was done, not only am I excited for what's to come, but I went and bought some back issues. So I've read the Chrononauts, and that story is just so much fun. Two brilliant minds that invent time travel and do what they want to do when they time travel because they can, because they know they're that brilliant. I love that idea. I just read Huck. That story ended up being such a different story than what I expected, but I freaking loved it. It was such a great story. And so that's really what it is. It's like I like the fact that now it's about collecting the books for the sake of getting a good story. And I think what was really funny was my parents never really understood my collecting. They never did. When I got into my 20s and they knew that I was still doing it, especially with the DVDs and the Funko Pops, they finally said, all right, you know what? If it makes them happy, it makes them happy. So I remember a couple of weeks ago when my parents were over to see my daughter, and my mom and I were just chatting, and she goes into the closet where all the comics are, and she sees all the books, and she's like, "What boxes, comics?" I'm like, "Yeah, they actually are." So she goes, "Are you just collecting them? Or are you actually reading them?" I'm like, "No, I've actually been reading them. As a matter of fact, if I didn't read comics during the pandemic, I probably would have gone out of my mind." And she was like, "At least you're reading something." So
It's funny because my mom, I talk to my mom, all the time, but she just randomly asked me, "So how many comic books do you have now?" I was like, "That's a random question." And she goes, "Well, you are collecting, like physical copies now, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I guess if I had to guess, I probably have, a couple hundred, somewhere in that region." She's like, "That's a lot." And I was like, "Well, not really if you think about it." I said, "Because, there's series." And I said, "I don't want to get too heavy into it." I said, "But I think I'm comfortable with that number. I don't really plan on getting, multiple boxes because even that number is a lot, and the amount of short boxes I have now takes up a lot of space."
no,
And
they do.
I said, "But you know what? I'm having a great time with this. This is probably the funnest reading experience I've had in my adult life." And she's like, "Well, you know what? That's what matters." And so,
Yeah.
absolutely, I can totally relate to that because it's really cool when you can, you saw your mom, but I could hear the smile on my mom's face when I'm talking to her on the phone, and it's just, little things like that lets you know that your parents get you, even if they don't get you.
And that's the other thing. It was like I was just telling my mother that, it's not just superheroes anymore. There are so many interesting stories. Like I told her about this Aftershock title called Shadow Doctor, which is based on a true story about a black guy in Chicago during Al Capone's reign, and he becomes Al Capone and his gang's secret doctor. Like I thought that was such a really cool idea for a story. And then I started telling her about, stories like Stray Dogs and Ghost Lore. I mean, like, I know that she is not interested in horror at all, but I'm just telling her about all these creative ideas. And I'm like, it's not that I don't enjoy reading actual books. I mean, that's the one thing over the last couple of years I haven't actually been reading actual books. But I made it a New Year's resolution to make sure that I actually did pick up some regular books along with comic books. But you want to know what the truth is? I'm having a good time with the books that I'm reading too. I'm reading a lot of Brandon Sanderson. So everybody who's Brandon Sanderson fans out there knows that if you're reading Brandon Sanderson, you're going to have a good time because he's a great writer. But comic books are just a completely different experience. And I think it's just
Oh,
because of the
completely.
fact that, yes, you can think, what's interesting is when you're reading a book, you're picturing the images in your head,
Yeah.
but when you're reading the comic book and you have the images, you're taking it a one step further. You're imagining what's going on between the pages. You're imagining the still pictures in motion. You're
Mhm.
you're you're imagining the sound effects of the fights and the dialogue and the characters. It's like that every single time you're reading a Batman comic, all you hear is either Kevin Conroy or Michael Keaton or Ben Affleck. Like that you hear those famous voices. And you get excited about that. It's like every single time I read a book with the Joker in it, all I hear is Mark Hamill's voice. Unless I'm actually reading The Dark Knight Returns and I'm actually hearing Michael Emerson's voice from the animated movie. But that's the point I'm trying to make. It's just like it's a completely different experience. I think it's a little bit more of a lively experience just because of everything that you get along with the words on the page.
Mhm.
And that's really where I stand 5 years into getting back into it. I mean, I actually, at one point, I don't know why I did this, but I think I actually once told my wife, I said, after 2025, I'm just not going to buy any more comics. Well, that I know for certain a lie. But one of the few things that I definitely know I need to do is I got to be a little bit smarter right now because for the last 2 years, I've been seeing my volume in terms of my purchasing decline, but I've been seeing my enjoyment of what I've been reading going up. So
Mhm.
what that means is I've been focusing on what I know I'm going to absolutely enjoy. But 2024, I'm starting to see the numbers of purchases starting to go up again, but it's for a very good reason, at least I think, but I don't know how long it's going to last. And that's just because of the fact that we're now in the beginnings of brand new comic book universes. We've got, and along with that being the thing, the names that are behind these big things are big names that people love. I mean, we just saw the birth of the Energon universe, and I'm reading all the titles. I mean, I don't feel as guilty as purchasing a mini or a maxi series as I do an ongoing series because you know eventually there's going to be an ending. But the Energon universe is just so enjoyable. The Transformers book is a godsend. I love that book so much. Last week, I just decided on a whim, yes, I'll go pick up Thundercats #1. What a good decision that was. That book was amazing. I am so excited. I also heard that it's actually not going to be an ongoing. I heard it's going to be at least 12 issues. So at least I know that by 12 issues, I'll have a complete set and I'll be fine with that. But the guy who's writing it, Declan Shalvey, we'll see if he actually gets another 12 issues. We'll see. But right now, I'm just having a blast with all of these books and knowing what's coming in April with Jeff Johns' Ghost Machine universe. I don't know how many titles I'm going to buy. I mean, I know the price is going to be right. I mean, what's very interesting right now is in 2 weeks, we're going to be getting the 350th issue of Spawn. And I'm reading the blurbs for the upcoming issue after issue 350 and all the Spawn titles. They say brand new arc begins. So I'm officially saying, am I going to stop here? Or am I going to keep going?
Yeah, that's about to happen with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles too.
Because you have to understand, I've been collecting Spawn since issue 300.
Wow.
Thank God Todd McFarlane is still keeping the price of each book at $2.99. That's the best thing. All
Yeah.
of his titles are $2.99. But I don't know. I mean, it would be cool to get to 400. I mean, obviously, if I stop reading at issue 351 with the epilogue story, I'll still pick up issue 400 because it's going to be a historic book, the longest running independent comic book ever. Like, it's never been done before. So just to have that for the sake of having it and knowing that it's going to be a true landmark in history, I'll be interested. But will I want to read issue 351 to issue 400? We'll see. I don't know. I just don't
Yeah.
know. So
That's why
that's
I'm
really what
interested
it
to
is.
see where TMNT is going to go, because I picked that up on a whim too when I started Comixology, because there was a lot of availability to those titles. And then I got into the floppy side of things. Now we're on that stretch to 150. We're almost there. And then once that stops, we're going to get a new story arc. But I'm highly vested in Saturday morning adventures. So, that I've been planted in, which is great because it's so colorful. It definitely reminds me of the 90s television show. So, yeah, there's a lot of fun things happening with TMNT. And then we've got, a lot to talk about of them this year, and
Well,
Kevin Eastman and
absolutely.
Peter Laird. Yeah, I saw your shirt.
Yeah,
So
we're going to
yeah,
talk about there's that. There's the new Last Ronin title coming out now.
yeah,
I'm excited about the fact that Kevin Eastman is going to be writing his first maxi series that has nothing to do with Ninja Turtles at all. I'd like to see
yeah,
if he still has what it takes, because that's what's so interesting about Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird. It's the fact that they never actually had to write any other title because they made so much money off of one. That's a rarity. I mean, that's why Todd McFarlane is a rarity too. All he ever really did when he finally started writing for himself was Spawn. He never broke free from Spawn. So I love the
Hey,
fact
if
that
it
he
works, it works.
that's exactly what it is. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know, build around it, build other titles around it, but they're all linked to the same thing.
Make
So
toys,
yeah,
make action figures.
yeah. And I mean, like with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like I am definitely excited for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Alpha because it's going to be a fresh start. And I know who's writing the book. It's Jason Aaron. And the interesting thing about Jason Aaron is he's one of these guys who was pretty much still working for the big two. And a lot of people were saying that he lost his footing and just people weren't enjoying his books again. But just now he's got this Batman miniseries that he's writing at DC called Batman Off World. I'm not reading it, unfortunately, but a lot of people are saying that it's a lot of fun. And they're saying this might actually be Jason Aaron back to form. So the fact that he's going to be writing Ninja Turtles for an indie company where he's going to have a little bit more breathing room, and I don't think he's really going to be bothered by the corporate monster, maybe this will be his second coming. So I'm excited for that. I really am. But so I'll take a look at the first arc and I'll see if I like it. But
Yeah, I give everything a shot once, and if it works, it works. If I
yeah,
don't resonate with it, on to the next. I
that,
don't waste a lot of time anymore on, well, let me pick up the second issue and see if it works. No, if I don't love the first one, I'm not going to love the second one.
yeah, because that's I was going to say this, and then we just trailed off into a great conversation. But Jed McKay, this is a guy that I know is a good writer and he likes to have fun. And the first title that I ever read of his was a Magic the Gathering title over at Boom Studios, and I read the first story arc, enjoyed it, but at the end, it really wasn't my thing. And I mean, like, it's actually one of those few that I'm not dissatisfied with. I liked it. It was still very entertaining, but I just didn't want to read on. But he's doing a lot of stuff over at Marvel now. And he wrote Moon Knight. And a lot of people really liked his Moon Knight run, and he just finished it. But I read the first story arc, and I just thought that the ending of the first story arc was so perfect, I just didn't want to read forward. So I only have 6 issues of Moon Knight. And now he's currently writing the ongoing Avengers run. So I read his first story arc, and I just didn't really care for it. I didn't think it was anything special. So I just stopped reading Avengers. But now, what's very interesting is that Marvel and DC have just been mediocre at best when it comes to their ongoing titles, except for maybe a select few. But right now, with this whole recreation of the Ultimate Universe, I mean, you and I had this conversation about Ultimate Spider-Man #1. And what's really crazy is the price is still going up. So I actually was ahead of the game and just recently picked up the second Ultimate title. I picked up Ultimate Black Panther #1. The book was really good. The price of that book is going through the roof now too. So like
Crazy.
Ultimate, so like Ultimate Spider-Man #1 is now like running for like $50 to $100 on eBay. Black Panther, Ultimate Black Panther #1 is now like 30 to 50. So we got Ultimate X-Men coming out in March, and what's very interesting about that book is it's like got the triple threat here. It's got a very well-known artist, Peach Momoko. People really like her work. She's got like this, because from her background, Japanese, she's got this great watercolor artwork. She surprised everybody with a mini series a couple of years ago called X-Men Demon Days. And not only did people love her art, people had no idea that she could write. So people like her writing. So she's going to be writing the book. She's going to be doing the artwork, and it's going to feature a whole new bunch of characters. So we've got first appearances in a #1 issue. So that is like, for speculators, that's like the ultimate thing, like buy the book. So I just know that, and that's the thing. I've never read any of her work. I've seen a lot of her artwork. I think it's gorgeous. So this is going to be my first venture into her artwork and her writing on my own as a purchased book. So yeah. And it's so funny. I was recently talking to Dan over via text messages. He was also talking to me about the Ultimate books. And he was also really upset that he sort of is like in the same position that I was. So now he's basically getting everything that he's like basically pre-ordering every #1 issue because he knows that. But again, he's collecting for the sake of speculation and collecting. I want to read these books if they're really good. Because that's the thing. I wasn't interested in Ultimate Spider-Man #1. It wasn't about the fact that the price was going up that got me to try and hunt down that book. It was the fact that everybody was saying the book was actually good because the current ongoing Spider-Man title sucks donkey balls right now. So they want a great Spider-Man book. Everybody wants a great Spider-Man book. So apparently this is the book. But it's just the first issue. Is issue #2 going to be just as good? We'll find out. I'll obviously be picking it up. I'll at
Yeah.
least go. Yeah, I mean, it's also just because of the fact that I like the artists and the writers that are behind it. Jonathan Hickman is a great writer. You're going to find that out because we're going to be doing our big project in the world of Marvel leading up to Secret Wars. When you get into his writing, especially with what we're going to be reading that's linked to Secret Wars, you're going to see what a great writer he is and why people love him so much and why people are hoping that this ultimate universe that he has started to take the charge on, because he's pretty much in charge of the whole project. I'm just hoping that this is him returning to form and respectability because of the disaster that the X-Men have been right now.
Yeah, I'm still not there in terms of buying for creators completely. I mean, there are, some go-to people that I have become well acquainted with, but a lot of my stuff is merely based on cover buys or story arcs, which I'm excited about. So I've added a ton of DC titles to my upcoming March and April. So I'm excited to see some of those titles start rolling in. A lot of, Batman stories are going to be entering into my world, but I'm still just kind of mixing it up and enjoying the journey, because I mean, every time we have a conversation there's something to be added to the TBR or to the pull list or to the buy list, and go seek this out. So I'm still learning, I'm still enjoying the journey, but I'm still having fun, and I think that's the most important part.
Yeah, that's one of the few reasons why, at the end of the day, when you take a look at the amount of books that I have, the money really doesn't matter because, at outside of the books that I'm not too thrilled about having, it's just like 95% of my collection is something that I don't regret. It's something that I'm happy about. And that also includes like specific covers that like there will be some times where I will buy 2 covers of a comic just because of what it is. And like, that I did what I did with Stray Dogs. I'm going to do the exact same thing with Feral because there's no reason not to. But
Mhm.
no, you're right. It's the fact that it's still fun.
Mhm.
5 years into this, and I'm still having a great time. I love when there are certain days on the calendar that just excite me so much. Wednesday is my favorite day of the week now because I just love the fact that I get to go to the comic book store if I'm able to, if weather permitting, etc. If other things don't, get in the way. But nothing gets me more excited than walking into the comic book store, saying hello to the manager, and seeing a stack of books with my name on it saying, "Read us, we're ready for you." It's great. I
It's
also
funny because
love.
my comic book store owner, she gets really excited because she sees that how my collection has kind of just increased exponentially, and when I have a big stack she's just excited for me. She's like, oh, look at all this fun stuff I have for you. Or, and she's even set things aside that she thinks I might like. There's no intent, just like, hey, I put some stuff aside for you, take a look at it, if you want it take it, if you don't I'll put it back on the shelf. But I think that's really cool because now she's kind of tailored to my taste. She knows kind of what I look for, what I seek, what I ask for, and she'll just kind of make these notes. So yeah, I mean, sometimes I'll go in and only have 2 floppies, sometimes I'll go in and walk out with 30. You just never know what your Wednesday is going to look like.
Exactly. That's the fun of it. I mean, and you're absolutely right. But that's also what makes a great store. And I think that's another reason why the comic book is so much fun to me. It's because, you go into the store and you not only get excited for the books that you're going to buy, but just love having the conversations. I mean, I loved the fact that when I discovered, unfortunately, 1 month later, when I discovered Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees by Patrick Holvarth, and the fact that I reached out to the comic book manager and said, "Hey, listen, I want you to put this one on my pull list." And when I walked into the store the day after we were talking about the book, he said, "I'm glad someone else is reading this book because this book is so good." And I love it when there's another person in the store who's buying their book and we start bringing up conversations on what we're reading. I remember that we were like, a guy who was so into Marvel and DC. He says, "I know the indie books are out there and I know that they're great, but what is there that you think I'm gonna like?" We both talked about Stray Dogs and we talked about Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees. I talked about Wild's End, and he got curious. And that was the most interesting thing. So it's just like the community's strong. The community, and that's the other thing. It's like you walk into the comic book store, and what's the general age demographic? It's not the child, it's the young adult. It's like ages 20 to 60. It's unbelievable that there are still people my age and older that are still buying and reading comic books. I love that. And I think it's
Well, that
just because,
just goes to show
yeah,
you the legacy too.
that's why.
There's still good stories being written. There's still amazing creators out there. And even though there's creators that are older than us, I mean, we've got creators in their late 50s, 60s, and beyond that are still very much a part of this creation process. And I think that as long as they continue to have a hand in it, there's always going to be something new and inventive. And then, when you have creators like Rob Liefeld that, recently just kind of ended his run with Marvel and the whole Deadpool thing, what's in store for him? I mean, that's not the end of his career. He's extremely talented. He's very much active in the community. Where are we going to see him in, a few months? I'm sure he'll take a small little hiatus, but he's going to be back with something epic. He's already spinning gears and talking to other creators about what's coming for him. So,
Yeah.
just there's a lot of exciting things that happen within the community with the creators. And the fact that they're always reinventing themselves and always coming up with these new ideas is just exciting. So, anytime creators collaborate, anytime a creator mentions another creator, my radar will go that way and I will be like, okay, let me check this out. It might not be for me, but that doesn't mean I can't suggest it for somebody else.
Yeah. Rob Liefeld is actually writing something big right now.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's very hard to get your hands on because it's not from any major label. I think it's directly from him.
Oh, well, shoot. Yeah, that sounds
Yeah, I don't
unattainable.
know. I don't know how the hell I'm gonna get my hands on it, but apparently he's like also retiring his original created universe from the early Image days, the Extreme universe. So apparently he's bringing like old characters from the 90s out for like one last hurrah. And I'm like,
Oh, wow.
that's pretty cool. Like again, I was never really fully invested in a lot. I mean, like oh god, I picked up when I was getting a lot of back issues. I picked up the first 10 issue, not the first 10 issues, the first Youngblood run. That really is a book that was for 13-year-old boys and seemed to be written by 13-year-old boys. It was one of the messiest, floppiest, stupidest books I ever read as an adult. So I'm just like, I have all of these vintage Image books from the 90s. I mean, I read the 3 issues of the very first Savage Dragon run by Eric Larson. That was fun. I haven't read Wildcats yet. I need to go back and read Wildcats, but I think what I'm really excited for is I hunted down the original 35 issues of Sam Keith, The Max. And what was so interesting about that book was the further you got into that series, the harder it was to hunt down the last books because apparently the first story, like the first 20 issues, were like mass marketed and mass produced. And then the last couple of issues had like very, very limited prints. So I think the Max issue 35 is the most money that I ever spent on a single comic book.
No, mine was this.
How much was that, by the way? I'm curious.
I got the whole entire 13 part series for 120.
That's actually the exact same price that I paid for my complete set.
Well, there you go. I might have actually gotten it a little cheaper because he and I were going back and forth, and I think we settled on a better price because of shipping. But they're in
Mhm.
impeccable condition. I couldn't be happier.
Yeah, mine are
But
in great condition
that
too.
that is to date the most expensive that I've paid for a comic series, but it is my absolute favorite. Really, this is my gateway into where we are now because this really set me up for all the things that we talk about,
But
today.
you
And it really got me interested in the history of DC and even being interested in Marvel. I had zero interest in Marvel, and now I'm reading Marvel titles too.
you didn't actually answer the question.
Oh, what?
I was talking about the amount of money that I spent on a single comic book, not a series.
Oh, not a series. Oh, gotcha. Oh, shoot. Well, what would be? I'd have to
I'll
think
tell
about that.
you. I'll tell you, and I know my wife is never going to watch this, but I spent in order for myself to get a copy of Max number 35, I spent $75 on the single book.
Yeah, I don't think I've
And
spent that much.
and the
I've
only
been very
reason
lucky,
why,
and that's why I say patience pays off. It's a virtue for me because I don't think I've overspent for anything vintage.
well,
I've put out a
that's
little bit of money for lots, but I don't think I've really spent a considerable amount on a single floppy.
well, the reason why I put that money down was because for months I couldn't find a single copy of the Max issue number 35 for under 100.
Oh yeah, no, I mean,
So the fact
I
that
totally agree with that,
I was
notion.
never going to spend $100 on a comic book, a single
Yeah.
comic book, no
Eh,
way.
never say never, you never know. You just it really depends on, and that's the beauty of collecting. It depends on what resonates with you, because I've said many a times I would never spend that for XYZ, and then I end up spending that because it's what I want. I
Eh,
think for me, probably Funko Pops once again is kind of where I say overspend, but it's just not where my comfort zone is. But if you miss out, sometimes you got to pay a little bit more, and it
well,
is what it is.
I did that with a Funko Pop as well. I spent about almost $70 on a single Funko Pop, but I
You
will
will
say
never beat this.
I am terrified. I don't ever want you
Don't
to
ask.
tell me. I don't ever want you to tell me how much you spent on that.
Don't
Never.
ask.
No, but
I have zero
one
regrets though, because as soon
oh
as I
no,
came in the mail, that was it. My collection was 110% complete.
that's what I'm saying. But no, the one that I spent the large amount of money on was a very, very, very limited piece. It was the promo giveaway at a Mets game that my wife and I couldn't attend.
Oh, cool.
It was David Wright dressed as Captain America. We couldn't go because I think my daughter was already born. And
Okay.
so I told my wife about this promo, and I told it to her, I gave her the details, and she was like, "How much are you willing to spend on eBay for that?" And
Wow. See,
I
that's
said,
always a nice little caveat when your significant
well,
other tells you,
that's what I'm
here's a
saying.
roadway.
No, it's because she's a David Wright fanatic. She loves him. So
Oh, that
I said,
helps.
I said to her, I'm not spending $100. I said, I will go as high as $75 for that. Luckily, we got it for 69.
Yeah, I think beyond that one, once again, Alice, I spent a little bit for this one, but that one was worth it because as soon as I bought it, it went up in price. And I hesitated on this one for a very long time. I should have bought this one right out the jump, but I didn't. And then the Up House, that one ended up costing me a little bit because once again, I hesitated. I didn't want to spend $50 when it came out. I'm like, I don't know, that's a lot for a pop. And then I ended up spending way more than that for it when I finally, because I there was no way I was going to get it for anything less. The price just wasn't going down.
So here we are 5 years later, and another 5 years is ahead of us, I think. I'm
I
really
know it
curious.
is.
I'm really curious to see. Well, hopefully by the end of the next 5 years, we will have officially completed Department of Truth.
Oh, I hope so. I'm
Me
been
too.
patiently waiting for that. I
Yeah.
think the only thing as a comic book collector I haven't shared with you ever, because it's never really been topic of conversation or there's never been like a segue to talk about it, is even before I started this journey in between the middle school years and this, animation slash comic journey I began with you. I actually own every Buffy and Buffy spin-off comic ever made.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. Good job.
Yes, and that was because I'm a completist in certain areas. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I own every mass market paperback ever produced, and I said, "Hey, there's comic books. Why not?" So I happened to just start collecting those, and it was around the same time the magazine was coming out, so I have every Buffy magazine ever printed, and those are hard to find now. So when Angel came out, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I have the Buffy comics, so I'll start Angel. And then there was quite a few spin-offs after the show, aired its final season. And so that's a collection I'm really proud of because those I purchased when they came out. My hands are the only hands that they've ever touched, and I have an absolute complete set. So I thought that
Well,
was kind of cool.
Well, like I said, let's see where the next 5 years take us. What I'm just hoping for is what my thoughts are in regards to this year for comics, and that video is most likely going to be already live on the channel before this one goes up. But yeah, I just want to make sure that the fun just doesn't stop. Like I just don't want it to slow down at this point in time, and I'm just hoping that
Oh,
through the next couple of years, Marvel and DC will find their footing. And I mean, who knows? I mean, I was watching the Super Bowl. Sorry about the 49ers, but I saw
right.
the Deadpool trailer and I'm just like, could this possibly them finally realizing that they've been idiots and maybe they're going to go back to form? Who knows? But anyway, everybody, that's going to wrap up another video over here on That's Comical. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a comment and like because we love to chat with you. And there's still plenty more stuff in store. So please hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest videos. And please put in the comments, everybody, Cammy, please make your videos already because we all want to see them.
I'm making them. I'm making them. I'll put them out. I swear.
I know you will. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, everybody. We'll see you in the next one.